I've heard a lot of talk about how they don't think that things will improve for them politically by the autumn, and so therefore they may as well go now and not, be prisoner of events between now and then.
I'm Matt Chorley, joined by our political brain boxes, Peter Manson, Polly Mackenzie and Daniel Finkelstein. If you want to get in touch, you can email howtowin@thetimes.co.uk or you can WhatsApp 0333 003 2353. How are we all?
Thank you, I'm very well indeed.
Very well indeed, but I've got to do something straight away. I was last night at a big event for Yorkshire, and as I left at the end of the evening and said I had to get my baby sleep get ready for the podcast, they said, "Oh, we love the podcast. Please, please, please give a big shout out for Yorkshire," which I'm now doing.
It's a mystery which way the start of the pod's going to go.
That's sort of Ian Duncan Smith intonation. The quiet man is turning up the volume. You didn't actually need to shout. I think the shout out
going to Yorkshire.
The shout out didn't involve you actually having to shout.
We had an international afternoon at school, my kids' school, last Friday, and one of the people brought Yorkshire as the country she was representing. I thought that was a bit weird. That weird Sheffield sauce that's like Worcestershire sauce, but that's not, and that's worse. What's it called? Henderson's relish. Ooh. We're going to get some criticism
Yorkshire
for that.
It does have
people.
the biggest, most powerful brand of anywhere in England, Yorkshire. You couldn't, I mean, West Midlands, no.
So big.
But Yorkshire tea was invented by a Swiss immigrant.
Was it?
Yeah.
Well,
he founded Betty's.
I'm working on Pinner, but we haven't yet got a county cricket team.
Or your own tea. What you have got, though, Danny, in your house is a very talented musician. So we heard last week with Sam on the kazoo playing the podcast theme. This is from Danny's son, Sam, who is a professional musician, with his collaborators, singer-songwriter Dan Briskin and producer Benji Stobart. Hang on, wait till you get to the end. It's worth it for the very end. Very nice. I feel like we've gone late night.
This is my favourite. So
here we
far.
are. Oh, we're talking. This is. Oh, we're gonna have to. Can you rewind it just a tiny bit, right?
Who was that? Dan?
That's Dan Briskin trying to be Barry White.
Here we go. Very good.
Very good indeed.
That's the best one, yeah.
It's very good, yes.
Yeah.
It's
Finkelstein.
So I suggested him he be inspired by Paul McCartney's Crossroads. Paul McCartney did a version of the Crossroads theme, which they ended up playing on Crossroads actually, instead of the original thing. But he did a really good job.
Really, really
nice.
nice.
He said it was late night. That I got this text from Sam at 1 o'clock in the morning. He'd obviously been doing a long session.
It definitely has that vibe.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, it's very chilled.
Very chilled. Yeah, chilled.
We like it.
How chilled should we be about an early election? Will it be in the autumn? Is that there's the whispers? Rishi Sunak, where he's talking Rwanda today, inflation coming down tomorrow potentially.
It suddenly occurred to me that me having said it'll be in October, Peter saying he thought it might be May, and Polly saying she thought it'd be January, that he'd end up calling it in July, and therefore to make us all look wrong. I think there is at least a chance of that. The thing that militates against it is Scottish schools going on holiday at the end of June. But the thing that militates in favour of it is I can't think that I've heard a lot of talk about how they don't think that things will improve for them politically by the autumn, and so therefore they may as well go now and not, be prisoner of events between now and then. But when I originally suggested they ought to go in May, one of my thoughts was that the economy might be better in May and get worse, but I don't think that's now going to happen. So I still think October, November, but there's just a little bit, people should just keep a little bit of a thought. There's a bit of talk in government circles, I picked it up.
I think there may be another reason why it may be July.
Go on.
The Labour Party campaign director, Morgan McSweeney, lives in Scotland with his wife and kid Magnus, and they're going on holiday in July. And I have a horrible, sneaky feeling that the Prime Minister's got wind of this.
I thought everyone was banned from going on holiday now in the Labour Party. But presumably if you're Morgan McSweeney, you can do what you like.
He's the boss. He can do what he likes. And he's going off on holiday in July. So I think that's probably dead cert. Election in July.
Sometimes you should just be chill about stuff you can't control, though. It's it's the Alcoholics Anonymous thing. The serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and whatever it is.
Is that you're saying we should be more chill, or the Prime Minister should?
Your question was, should we be chill about an early election? And my point is, we can't control it. We can speculate on the mind of Rishi Sunak, but in the end, because we have this ludicrous system in this country whereby prime ministerial whim is what determines the date of an election. Could be anything, really. Don't know. I've stopped having any useful knowledge here.
You've given up on January in the sweepstake.
It's only that January is still possible. Every day that he doesn't call, what did you say, 209 days left? So
209 days until he has to call one.
So the percentage chance is slowly ticking up as the days go by. Does he want to put himself out of a job? Do all of those Red Wall MPs want to be out of a job? They probably don't, actually. So there's no expectation that things will tick up much. But, who wants to be unemployed?
I'm concluding that Rishi Sunak wants his 2 years in number 10.
It looks better on Wikipedia.
That means the autumn. Yeah, he's thinking about his future career.
But he's already got it for Wikipedia, isn't he? Because he's got 2024, but he could have 25.
Go down to 2025, that's why. January the 1st, just to annoy Peter.
Danny, is there a risk... because I think we've been on the very first episode we talked about this, that you said that actually John Major should have gone earlier, that the longer he goes, actually far from... hoping that something turns up, he might actually do better if he suddenly did it now while Morgan McSweeney's on holiday.
If you assume that the driving force in politics is it's time for a change, then you think to yourself, well, the longer I go, the bigger ahead this builds up. Of course, there's the thing where you wait for something to turn up, but there's an assumption always that it's a bit like in San Francisco, where you always think the right way to go is to head downhill. But it isn't often. Things are going to get worse when you wait for something to turn up. What you wait for to turn up isn't very good. And interestingly, when lots of stories in politics tend, because of this mood, to be kind of framed as being against the Tories, the likelihood is that things that turn up will be bad rather than good. That's the likelihood. So I don't think the psychology of Rishi Sunak will mean that he would be that bothered about this 2 years business. Particularly when you say he'll go off to California and everything.
San Francisco and work out whether or not you should go down.
Exactly. So I don't think that will be a feature. But what might be a feature is just not feeling, I really need to wait forever because I want to be Prime Minister for as long as possible. I'm not sure that is what animates him, weirdly. It might be that he has some things he wants to do and he doesn't feel he can do them between then and...
What are they done? Oh, this is getting exciting. What does he actually want to do? What's the plan?
Go on a visit to Rwanda.
Smoking. He's banning smoking. And chessboards.
Really, really slowly.
A chessboard in every village.
And maths for everyone, with minus the number of maths teachers that we need.
So those things, and also, obviously he thinks that is sending the economy in the right direction, and he doesn't think Labour will do that. So, all the various things which were quite substantial that he talked about in the speech he made last week. So he may just want to see some of those a bit further along the road.
He actually said last week that he would stay on as an MP. Do we believe that?
For about 3 weeks.
Well, interestingly, I had a conversation with him after he lost the leadership election, when the common assumption was that he would immediately go. And I said to him, are you planning to fight the next election? Are you planning to stay in politics? And he absolutely was. And at that circumstance, he had no reason to believe that he was going to leave, that Liz Truss was going to leave, and the opportunity was presented again. So it wasn't his plan at that point, but it may be different now that he's experienced being Prime Minister and he's over the other side of that if he loses the election, which is the assumption we're working on. I don't regard that as what this idea that he'll go off and go and work in California as being discreditable. I'm actually quite delighted to have a prime minister. I'm delighted to have a prime minister would be
Who's
sought
employable after
who
leaving
will be
Downing
sought
Street.
after in that way. Yes, I don't think this whole idea that he's a tech bro is an insult at all.
I hear Santa Monica's just wonderful,
Lovely
brilliant,
this time of year. Yeah.
and great.
Yeah.
It's nice round the year.
Should he do so? The other question I wanted to ask you: the inquiry. So we've also had the infected blood inquiry back this week. Post office inquiry rumbles on. Could he sort of is he burnishing his reputation by doing what so many other people haven't done, by saying he'll sort out the compensation for the infected blood? You know, he hasn't yet gone quite as far with the post office, but that's because they're still waiting for that inquiry to fold out. Is he getting some of those things on his list of jobs done?
Well, yes, but also, you know, I mean, I'm not the world's biggest Rishi Sunak fan, but he is basically a decent human, and it's the job, it's his responsibility, and I think he just thinks of these as just such obvious requirements for the state to make recompense for these horrific events. I don't know. I worry about the framing that you've just used, as if he's sort of like doing it so he can put it in his political scorecard or even on his Wikipedia entry. This doesn't feel like that's the vibe to me.
I don't want to sound churlish, of course, but there was an interim report about this a year ago, and he could have taken action pretty darn quick. And a whole number of parliamentary manoeuvres have been made in the last year to force his hand on this. So he is slightly dragging his feet, but okay, now he's coughed.
Blair and Brown dragged their feet on it.
No, they just didn't want an inquiry. And the reason why the Labour government was so off inquiries was because of Savile. If you remember the Savile inquiry into Bloody Sunday, it was set up in 1998. I came into Northern Ireland to become Secretary of State a year later, and already my officials were expressing alarm about the sort of extensive, laborious, expensive, time-consuming arrangements that were being put in place for this. And it duly went on from 1998, finally reported in 2010, something in the region of £400 million later. It was a lawyer's bonanza, and concluded well and straightforwardly. And David Cameron very, very well just jumped up and said, look, embrace the entire thing. There having been an original inquiry by Lord Widgery, which was a terrible, shameful whitewash of the whole thing. Cameron got up and said, yes, you know, the Paras fired first. They fired into unarmed civilians, and also, very sorry, somebody who was wounded on the ground was also shot.
That might explain why that might explain why they weren't keen on a public inquiry, but it doesn't explain why successive governments didn't do anything about this.
No, it doesn't. It's almost inexplicable. Almost inexplicable.
I don't think. I mean, I think now that you've got an inquiry and the inquiry is going to report, you know, within a year, you don't start doing things based on the inquiry until it's finished. So I don't think that is actually uncharacteristically a bit grudging. But let's hope that he does it now. And I think Polly's right. Actually, you know, one of the things that people criticise Rishi Sunak for, and I think it's correct, is he's not that interested in one of the key parts of his job, which is politics. This sort of thing does actually animate him, right? So actually seeing whether he can technically find a solution. And sometimes people sort of think, well, you know, is that a bit like they sometimes did with Nigel Lawson, where they felt that he knew so much technical detail, he was doing things that were actually should have been better done by Treasury officials than by him. The Rishi Sunak can be a bit like that, but I think this plays to his strengths rather than some of the other areas where we've identified weaknesses.
What do you think, Polly?
I think Danny's right. You know, the governments do obfuscate and delay sometimes on these things when it is clear that to do the process properly will take years. There is this, you know, a sense that can't we just brush it under the carpet? And I think governments of every colour end up doing that. But there comes a moment when there's just a big pile of stuff under the carpet. And it would be much healthier and better if we could have a culture of accountability and whistleblowing that enabled us to, I guess, reduce the time it takes to get to the point where, in the end, the inquiry has to happen, or in the end, the compensation simply must be paid. And that probably requires us, yes, maybe we need better political leaders, but we also probably need a different culture of blame where it is perceived as less catastrophic to have made a mistake, so that people can, fess up to them when they happen, which is all the time.
I feel there's got to be another way, not the do nothing way, and not the decades, hundreds of millions of pounds public inquiry lawyers bonanza sort of public inquiry way. But if you take the post office Horizon scandal, this is interesting because you have on the one hand the government, which has sort of notional ultimate responsibility, but complete operational autonomy by the post office, with ministers being told constantly by officials, this is not for you, this is for the post office, they have operational independence, they have satisfied themselves, it's not for you, to etc., etc. I feel there has to be some third way, to coin a phrase, in which somebody out there checks the homework of the post office, who says, well, actually, the MPs can take these growing number of cases and issues and said, look, you've got to take a look at this. Some sort of regulator, some sort of ombudsman, somebody who's not a minister, who can't sort of, follow the sort of chief executive of the post office in everything he or she is doing, but somebody who can just come in and say, right, I want to know all the facts, and who asks questions and says to ministers, I think this is now so important and there's so much smoke arising from this. I think there's some fire here. You're going to have to look at it. I wish there was something like that, that wasn't a decades-long public inquiry.
People did keep raising it. It was select committees and MPs. The problem was the post office even kept telling ministers, it's all fine. There's no, there aren't any issues. Ultimately, it seems, based on sort of what we've seen so far, that there were people lying in the process, and you can't.
And that has got to be brought out. But instead of these inquiries being a sort of elaborate sort of blame game in which sort of politicians and officials and people are put in the stocks and have rotten tomatoes thrown at them, for days on end. We've got to learn lessons. I mean, how can we avoid this happening in the future? The best thing that can come out of the Horizon Post Office inquiry is an explanation of how it happened, how it can be put right, how we don't repeat this sort of fiasco again, and we change things for the future, rather than just looking eternally into the past and trying to point the finger and making everyone feel, grim about it.
Well, it's a good point about the never-ending public inquiries. Let's move on. Up next, we were going to talk about how you organise stunts, speeches, catch the nation's eye when they might not be paying quite as much notice of politics as the panel does. We'll do that next on How to Win an Election.
How to win an election. Oh, yeah. We about to win this one with Daniel Fink.
So let's talk now about how it feels like the long campaign is all, well underway. We've had lots of speeches and backdrops and pledge cards and all of that. How do you catch the public's attention with a political stunt?
Oh, very easy. Ice cream.
Ice cream.
Ice cream. Don't you remember the ice cream stunt?
Tony.
In 2005, when we went into the election with this ridiculous, sort of vicious, sort of rumour that, suggestion that Tony and Gordon weren't seeing eye to eye on everything. I mean, obviously could be absurd.
And then they had a Mr. Whippy to put everything to bed.
And they went on the campaign visit, and as they sort of walked down this sort of path, sort of teeth gritted, Tony saw a Mr. Whippy van, and somebody said, go on, Tony, go and buy Gordon an ice cream. And he went off to the Mr. Whippy van. Of course, he arrived there, didn't have any money, couldn't pay for it. So either Angie Hunter or Kate Garvey, I don't know who, rushed up with the money, and then Tony sort of shouted back to Gordon, "Gordon, do you want a chocolate flake?" "No, I don't want a chocolate flake." And Tony said, "Oh, well, I do." And so Tony arrives with 2 ice creams, one with a chocolate flake, the other not, completely upsetting the symmetry of the entire event, in which they were meant to be sort of 2 equal titans joined at the hip. And, well, of course, obviously, as we know, they lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
Until one of them took the other's job.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem with all stunts is that the press will use them to tell the story they wanted to tell. So that appeared with a load of stories about the split between Gordon and Tony. Although, obviously, it was better photos than not. But I do remember the first day of the 1997 election campaign was John Major visited a Formula One car, the idea being British manufacture, the future, Britain's on the right track, don't turn back, a metaphor as well. Only this car didn't have any wheels on when they arrived, so it was wheels come off Tory campaign, even on the first day. So and you get and then I remember the last day, all the trouble that was taken with John's photocalls, and then he appeared underneath a sign that said exit. Which was, the day before the general election, when it was obvious we were going to lose. So it's very difficult. And, the classic example of that is Ed Miliband with his sandwich, where, really just nothing more important or significant than eating, he just was eating a sandwich. And yet it turned into a story about his media appeal. So unfortunately, when you do these things, you're not entirely in control of the way that they'll.
But that wasn't. I mean, to be fair to Ed Miliband, as we always are, that wasn't actually
Don't mention the Ed Stone.
That
please.
wasn't. Well, let's talk about the Ed Stone, which is much better. It's much better because at least the bacon sandwich, he was just eating a bacon sandwich.
Correct,
it wasn't a photo call.
Well, it was. I mean, obviously, he was
a
eating
phone
it.
call, and it was a
photo
particularly ugly photo. I
Yeah.
mean, that was the problem.
Peter, were you responsible for Neil Kinnock's walk along the beach when he fell over?
That was it. That was actually in 1983. That was just before my time.
Right.
But if you go back to the 1980s, sometimes literally the only thing you can do with a party is change its look and change its presentation. And sooner after I sort of joined the Labour Party as its campaign director, I found that literally the only thing I could control in this party was its presentation. And we launched this incredible campaign, which Neil Kinnock wanted to call Labour's Campaign for Freedom and Fairness. Very catchy, and he wanted to reclaim the word freedom from Mrs. Thatcher and attach it to Labour's sort of brand value of fairness. And this campaign was a complete revolution in Labour's presentation. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary.
If you do say so.
It had 2 things. It had a wonderful black, grey, and silver metallic badge with the words Labour putting people first on it, which is what I converted Labour's Campaign for Freedom and Fairness into. And the whole iconic image was a 10-year-old girl who we took to the top of Primrose Hill, and she was reaching up into the sky, this sort of symbolic, reaching out for opportunity and aspiration, all of which Labour was going to meet and deliver. And at the press conference launching the campaign at the London International Press Centre, the girl came along. She was brought there by her father, just to see the whole thing happening. Neil took one look at her, grabbed her, held her aloft over his sort of shoulders. The media went mad, delirium. I mean, this was described as Labour's first steps in the direction of electoral victory, which obviously took some years. But standing at the back of this was the veteran left-winger, Eric Heffer, who arrived, a member of the National Executive Committee, arrived uninvited, and he stood at the back, not mumbling, but shouting, "This is disgusting," he said. "I am disgusted. This is not what I joined the Labour Party for," and of course, which was really rather the point of the whole thing, that Eric Heffer should be disgusted, and the public should be...
Polly, did you have Eric Heffer on your bingo card?
No, I'm afraid I've never heard of Eric Heffer.
Oh, come on, Polly.
No.
No, what?
Come on. But let's talk
Look,
about.
I'm
Let's
young,
talk about,
I'm young.
Let's talk
I'm
about
not that
Lib
young,
Dem
but
stunts
still.
instead, because they have taken the mere photo call and turned it into an
Yeah,
art
it is
form.
interesting, isn't it? 'Cause, I mean, the whole point of this, right, is it's an attempt to create visual storytelling to bring your strategy or your underpinning message, whether that is I love construction or I love Gordon Brown. Bring it to life, right?
I love chocolate flake.
And because you know that, right, newspapers have to carry pictures, and the broadcast news, you know, that it helps to cement the story. And so people are looking for visual metaphors for the message. And that is where the Liberal Democrats have taken those metaphors and like beaten them within an inch of their lives. So it's like the sort of clip art version of the metaphor. Instead of thinking subtly about, you know, how do we convey friendship but via the medium of ice cream, it's how do we say time's up? Oh, let's have a big clock and let's make it tick. And I think it's adorable because, you know, when the Liberal Democrats obviously fight a different kind of battle than Labour or the Conservatives because they are sort of more of an insurgent force, more trying to kind of force their way into the news. There is no, I don't think any broadcasters feel obliged to cover a Liberal Democrat visit. And so do something a bit silly. It's a bit like one of your stand-up acts, right? But, you know, worse.
So Eric
Why am I the victim of? No, but I know how they came about because there was a set of local election results where the Lib Dems had done quite well, but then they just didn't feature in the sort of coverage because Ed Davey just gone and stood next to a local
No, in
councillor.
the olden days, it used to just be having those big orange diamonds saying "winning here" behind the person. But you know, at a certain point, you're quite a marginal party in British politics, and it's not enough. So, you know, you need the big visual metaphor.
So Eric Heffer was the
I don't care.
was the
I'm
deputy.
really sorry.
He was
I
the
just-
deputy employment spokesman of the Labour Party in 1972 when he
I was
resigned.
born in 1980, and I
When
don't
he-
care.
When he resigned, just let me finish. When he resigned over the feeling that Frank Allone's critique of Reg Prentice was correct. I think I've got that correct. I think the interesting thing about that, by the
I
way,
want to go home.
one of the reasons.
Interesting thing you say.
One of the reasons why you know. There are a few people who are better informed or on the ball about politics than Polly, and it's very interesting that somebody just outside your age bracket, like Eric Heffer, who was you know a significant figure in the left of the Labour Party at the time, just fades out.
So
completely.
can I, on that
I think
point, I'd like-
completely justifiably.
So
because
I-
it's just interesting.
Now, I'd like to tell a story, please. Excuse me. So-
Only if it involves Eric Heffer.
No, it doesn't, but it involves Tim Farron. So Tim Farron, when he was first elected,
Who's Tim Farron? I've never heard of Tim Farron.
he told a good story about when he went on a tour of Parliament with a bunch of teenage kids. He sort of, when he was first elected, he sort of didn't know his way around the building, so he sort of attached himself to a tour. And they were in the House of Lords, and Geoffrey Howe walked past, and he said, "Oh, look, it's Geoffrey Howe." And this teenager said, "Who's Geoffrey Howe?" And he said, "He's the guy who brought down Margaret Thatcher." And the teenager said, "Who's Margaret Thatcher?" So yeah, even Margaret Thatcher will be forgotten.
I mean,
but
Eric
slower
Heffer
than
was,
Eric Heffer.
Eric Heffer was also the man who, in 1985 in Bournemouth, at the great anti-militant speech of Neil Kinnock, do you remember the grotesque chaos speech?
Spectacle of...
Eric Heffer.
Taxis.
Eric Heffer was the man who stormed off the platform in protest
okay.
at Neil Kinnock's speech. So, I mean, he's quite a figure.
Yeah.
was in
Quite a
favour
figure,
of-
Polly.
of
He was in.
buying
He was,
taxis.
he was a
Are people-
Merseyside MP and therefore had rather too close an association with the militant tendency out there in the
Do you think people are going
northwest.
to click on this episode if it's called "How to Remember Eric Heffer"?
No.
Right, up next.
I sort of
I'm
feel
gonna-
like I don't know what this guy looks like, but in my mind, he's Eric Pickles.
He
but
he
perhaps
looks
with a
as he
little-
sounds. He looks as he sounds.
Right, we'll have a look. Up next, I'm going to bring you some of my favourite stunts, including Min Campbell in the toilet, which is one of my favourites. We are talking stunts and how to catch the eye and communicate a message through your stunt. My favourite, the one that I immediately thought of when thinking of this, was in 2007. It was Lib Dem conference. There was swirling speculation that Min Campbell might be on the way out. And that Nick Clegg was being a naughty boy, and so was Chris Huhne. Chris Huhne just kept turning up in the press office and just hanging out, just to tell everyone how very loyal he was. And to prove that Min Campbell was still a dynamic, thrusting party leader, they took him to a sort of green, like an eco house for photos to communicate his green credentials. And then they took...
This was not the best day of my
They
life.
took him into a bathroom so he could see the green bathroom. And the only photos that emerged from this is, and I'm reading the report now, yesterday's photo of Min Campbell pointing a finger down an organic toilet bowl while visiting an environmental project. It's genuinely... Were you involved in this?
I was not involved in this. You know, David Cameron had...
No, let's not move off Min Campbell.
No, but I'm just saying that actually it comes down to the advanced kind of team for this and how brilliant they need to be. You know, Danny's mentioned spotting a sign that might say exit that you need to keep people away from. But actually, you know, you need to plot step by step exactly what will they look like, what will they do, because you've got photographers who are determined to take the most difficult, most ludicrous version of the photograph. David Cameron had a woman called Liz Sugg, who's now in the House of Lords, who was exceptional at getting visits right. The Lib Dem team were actually broadly quite good, but what they did not foresee is that they needed to tell Min Campbell not to point down a toilet.
But I remember
Because,
speaking
you know,
to the
that's-
photographers, and they said that was the only photo opportunity they had was they took him in. Would you like to see it? Look, I've looked it up.
One of
There
the
it is.
people who was involved with Tony. One of the people who was
He's
involved.
literally pointing
Pointing down the
the...
toilet. I think it ended up on the front page of Private Eye with, is this where I put my policies?
But that's you're missing. Of course, they did the whole tour with him.
Yeah.
Right. So what you need is to always be absolutely on your guard, thinking about what's the worst photograph that could be taken of me in this particular second.
It's this one.
And the answer was that one.
It didn't
And-
help that it's also got sort of like disability handrails next to the toilet,
But
just
they
to
are
really
very
add to the
difficult. Paul's
stuff.
right, they're very, very difficult. And
Yeah.
somebody told me that they worked on these for Tony Blair and then went to talk to Gordon Brown's team just as they were leaving 10 Downing Street, and Gordon Brown's team was taking over and said, you know, happily talk to you about all the pitfalls. And they said, yes, we'll be in touch, and they never were. And she told me that story on the day that Gordon appeared with a massive splodge on because he couldn't be bothered to wait for the makeup to finish, and because he was quite, you know, impatient. And he appeared with sort of huge orange. Do you remember this? With a big, huge orange.
Well, in fact, on the day he announced his leadership bid for the Labour Party, his face was obscured by a what do you call it, like an auto cue thing, a glass screen. You literally the only live picture you couldn't see his face properly.
But it's because half the problem is a good quality advanced team who can plan these things, but the other half of the problem is persuading your principal, your minister, to actually listen to good advice, and very often they simply won't take that advice.
I do remember though when I was sort of in my early 20s, and David Owen was running the SDP, and it had become a very small political party after the merger of the rest of the SDP. David Owen, there was a bomb scare at the party conference, and David decided to do the speech outside the conference centre on the beach. And I basically quite pompously advised against doing this because I really knew little about media at that point. And he eventually said, look, I'm just doing it. And he went and did it. And of course, this speech, which otherwise would have got no coverage whatsoever,
It was a sensation.
the speech on the beach. It was. And it was incredibly powerful. So sometimes experienced politicians can have a hint, but then on other occasions, and I must emphasise there for this occasion, but William Hague obviously put on a baseball cap to protect himself against the sun. Not unreasonably, one or two of his people had thought that, you know, they should brand this item, and when they did, it was a disaster, and people were still talking about it. Interestingly, in focus groups, they said he's the one that wore the baseball cap back to front, which he didn't. But it's just because it tells a narrative about the person.
But in terms of what you're trying to communicate, another one of my favourite ones, because there was always the concern that Ed Miliband, to be fair to Ed Miliband, didn't look prime ministerial. So everywhere we went, he took a lectern in order to deliver his speeches, including when he went to a woman's garden in Cardiff with his lectern and gave a speech in front of a small group of people. And all you can see behind him is just a row of someone's washing. Yeah, so prime ministerial.
So my favourite visit, which actually was just being reminded of this week, was in 2015, where the Liberal Democrats, again, still fighting for attention, a colleague of mine, Adam Pritchard, arranged a visit for Nick Clegg to visit a hedgehog sanctuary.
Oh, yeah.
And what the metaphor or purpose of that, who knows? But it was lovely. And the hedgehogs were cute.
That whole 2015 Lib
was
Dem
hilarious.
tour was just, it was like Nick Clegg was sort of doing Make-A-Wish. He was just sort of, just his bucket list, because he went on a zip wire. He went and saw the hedgehogs.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a bucket list, isn't it? No? It is, I mean, mostly it's that fight for attention when the two-party system is trying desperately to push you out of getting any attention. And sometimes, sometimes you overreach. Sometimes you create a giant clock or drive through a wall.
In fact, I think the hedgehog he met only had 3 legs. And the headline I put on it when I was at Mail Online is, he's got a lifespan of 5 years and keeps going round in circles. Nick Clegg meets Humpty the Hedgehog.
So you found the visual metaphor. Well done.
Yeah.
Cute hedgehog,
What
though.
did you do if we talked about the red tape?
No, that
Bonfire.
That was
Have we done that on the pod?
in order
No.
to distract attention from the rows inside the Conservative Party. Michael Ancram, the chairman at the time, decided the thing that Conservative Party needed to do was organise its own fringe events. And of course, this wasn't ever going to work. But his idea was we should have a bonfire of regulations. And I was the head of policy at the time, so I sort of said, "Well, Chairman, the problem is we're not really specifying too much which regulations we want to abolish. So what do you suggest we put on this bonfire?" And he said, "Well, people could always bring their own." So I said, "Well, I don't know about anyone else. I normally leave my regulations at home when I come to conference." And then somebody else said, "I think we should have a." We need to give people food if they come to this. I mean, that's in the middle of this conversation. We need to give people food. My friend Rick Nye then said, "How about a barbecue of regulations?" So at that point, I completely lost it. Then what happened was this was taken away. I thought George Osborne, who was there, kept kicking me, saying, "We'll just kill this later." And we then failed to do so. But what happened was that it turned out that having a bonfire was on the seafront at Bournemouth was in fact against regulations, so you couldn't have one. So it was decided that the best thing to do was to have balloons of regulations that you would release into the air, and on these balloons would appear the words, the education plan of plans, which was the only thing that we definitely wanted to get rid of. So we had to have our education team, and the education team was responsible for throwing these balloons off the platform. But it was very windy on the front at Bournemouth, so when they flew the balloons flew back in their faces. This is made more comic by the fact that our education team, who couldn't stand each other, were Theresa May and John Bercow. So you can imagine how amused either of them were by this particular incident. And I do remember somebody was walking the party chairman towards this event and said, "Chairman, we better leave. It's going to be a fiasco," not realising that it actually been Michael's idea the whole time. I was watching this out of my hotel window, and I promise you, I actually burnt myself on the radiator because I was laughing so much at this event. And so, fortunately, even though it was politically terrible, it has caused me years of amusement.
You basically you'd have benefited from some regulation on the temperature of radiators.
Exactly.
God, this story has made the entire podcast series worthwhile.
Yeah, I think it was worth it. Well, some people have been in touch. They're not happy.
Oh dear.
Eric Heffer was a fine man.
Oh no, I've done it again.
A man of principle and a great constituency MP. This metropolitan sneering is in very bad taste.
Oh God. Oh no, it's going to go viral again.
Hang on.
Well,
The Hefferites.
But he was
Hefferites
from
are all coming up.
Merseyside, right?
Yeah.
Which is in fact a city.
Yeah.
And so actually metropolitan.
Yeah.
So
I think
I think it's the sneering rather than
Okay, well,
metropolitan.
I didn't say he
say
wasn't a great
okay.
man.
Well, I will say that. I don't say he was a bad person in any way. I'm sure he had great integrity.
Sorry,
but
I shouldn't have brought
the
this up again.
Eric Heffer's political position, on the aforementioned row involving Frank Lawn and Reg Prentice was outrageous, as was indeed his attitude to Neil, walking out of Neil Kinnock's landmark speech.
Polly's just thinking about tying a photo of Eric Heffer to a balloon and releasing it.
But that doesn't mean he was a bad person.
I wouldn't do anything so environmentally irresponsible,
Good
Matt.
point.
Because I care about environmental regulations,
And you
unlike
shouldn't be
Mr.
releasing-
Finkelstein.
Yeah.
Tell you who was nice. That was his wife, Doris.
Right, that's enough.
Doris Heffer.
Doris,
Yes.
you've
You're
made
like,
that up. You've
what?
made that up.
No, he hasn't. Of course he hasn't.
Oh.
These people know nothing.
Honestly.
They don't even know who Eric Heffer was married to.
If you
It's
can bear
outrageous.
it, we'll be back next week. 0333 003 2353 if you want to get in touch. You can email howtowin@thetimes.co.uk. That was How to Win with Peter Madison, Polly Mackenzie, Danny Finkelstein, and me, Much. Surely see you next week.